The stretch of road leading through Hollow Creek was infamous. Drivers swore the highway had a way of lulling you into a trance, its unending darkness broken only by faint headlights and the occasional street sign. Few dared to drive it alone at night, but Ben didn't have a choice. His shift at the diner ran late, and the quickest way home was through Hollow Creek Highway. The clock on his dashboard read 1:43 a.m. as he turned onto the road. The trees loomed like jagged shadows on either side, their branches clawing at the moonlit sky. His car's headlights seemed to vanish into the blackness ahead. Ben kept the radio off. The silence felt more comforting than static. But as he rounded a bend, he saw something up ahead, a figure standing by the roadside, one arm raised in a half-hearted attempt to hitch a ride. It was a young woman in a pale, tattered dress. Ben slowed, the image of her burning into his mind. Her hair was dark and wild, obscuring her face, but she seemed frail, trembling as though lost. Rolling down the window slightly, he called out, "You okay? Need a ride?" And she nodded without a word and climbed into the back seat. The air inside the car grew icy the moment she sat down. Ben glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She stared straight ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face still hidden beneath her hair. "Where are you headed?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just down the road," she whispered. Her voice was faint, like a breeze brushing against his ear. Ben nodded, focusing on the road. The longer he drove, the heavier the air felt, pressing down on him like a weight. He glanced at the mirror again, and his stomach tightened. Her reflection wasn't there. The back seat was empty. Ben gripped the wheel tighter, refusing to look back. The car's temperature dropped further, his breath visible now in the frigid air. "You're going too fast," her voice whispered, though she was nowhere to be seen. Ben slammed on the brakes, his car skidding to a stop. The road was empty again. No sign of her. His chest heaved as he tried to collect himself. "Just my imagination," he muttered, shaking his head. But then he saw it. In the distance, illuminated by his taillights, the figure stood in the middle of the road, her head tilted unnaturally to the side. "You didn't take me home," she hissed, her voice echoing unnaturally in the silence. Ben's hands fumbled to shift the car into reverse, but the engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered, casting the figure in eerie flashes of light. She was closer now, closer, until her face pressed against his window. Her skin was gray and stretched tight over her bones, her eyes hollow pits of darkness. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as cracks formed across her face, spreading like spider webs. The last thing Ben heard before the world went dark was her whisper, "Now you'll stay forever." The next morning, a passing truck driver found Ben's car abandoned on the side of Hollow Creek Highway. The engine was cold, and the driver's seat was empty. But in the back seat, there was a faint outline of frost, shaped like a figure sitting patiently, waiting for the next driver to come along. Nina hated working the graveyard shift at St. Mark's Hospital. The quietness was unnatural, as if the building itself held its breath. The emergency department would sometimes roar to life with chaos, but the upper floors, especially the abandoned Wing C, were unnervingly still. It was nearing 3 a.m., the witching hour, as her co-workers joked. Nina sat at the nurse's station, finishing a chart. The dim fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, the only sound accompanying the rhythmic beeping of distant monitors. Her radio crackled to life. Room 317. A distorted voice said. Nina frowned. That wing had been closed for renovations for months. No one was supposed to be up there. Did someone just call for 317? She asked through the radio. Static. Sighing, she grabbed her flashlight and badge. Probably maintenance messing around, she muttered, trying to reassure herself. Still, her pulse quickened as she made her way to the elevator. The doors opened with a ding, revealing a dark corridor. The air was colder here, the usual hum of life absent. The flashlight beam revealed peeling wallpaper, plastic sheets covering old furniture, and scattered construction tools. "Hello?" Nina called out, her voice trembling slightly. No answer. She approached room 317, the door ajar. Pushing it open, her flashlight revealed an empty hospital bed, its sheets perfectly tucked. The faint smell of antiseptic lingered. And then, the phone on the wall rang. Nina jumped, her flashlight beam shaking. The sound was impossibly loud, echoing through the desolate wing. She hesitated before picking up the receiver. "Hello?" she whispered. A pause. Then, a rasping voice. "You shouldn't be here." Her stomach turned to ice. She slammed the receiver down and spun around to leave, only to find the corridor completely dark. "Nina!" a voice whispered. She whipped the flashlight around, the beam landing on a figure standing at the end of the hall. It was a man in a hospital gown, his face gaunt, eyes sunken into hollow sockets. His lips stretched into an unnatural grin. "Leave!" he hissed, his voice layered as though two people spoke at once. Nina stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. She scrambled to pick it up, the beam cutting through the darkness again, but the figure was gone. She didn't wait. She ran, heart hammering, until she reached the elevator. Jabbing the button repeatedly, she glanced back. The man stood at the far end of the hall, grinning. Slowly, he raised a hand and waved. The elevator doors opened, and Nina threw herself inside. As they closed, she heard the faint ring of the phone. Again. Back at the nurse's station, she tried to tell her co-workers what had happened, but they dismissed it as stress. 317? One said, laughing nervously. That room's been empty for years. The last patient died there after calling for help all night. Nobody answered. Nina didn't finish her shift. She left St. Mark's that night and never returned. But every so often, her old coworkers swear they hear a phone ringing from the abandoned wing. It started with a rumor. Everyone at Oakwood High whispered about the extra student. Teachers swore they always had one more kid on their rosters than they remembered assigning. Attendance sheets would mysteriously have a name no one recognized, Emily Hart. When Kayla transferred to Oakwood, she didn't think much of it. Just another dumb school ghost story, she told herself. But that changed during her second week. It was during homeroom when Kayla noticed the girl. She sat at the very back of the room, hair hanging in her face, scribbling furiously in a notebook. None of the other students paid her any attention. "Who's that?" Kayla whispered to her seatmate, Mia. Mia frowned. "Who?" Kayla pointed, but when she looked again, The desk was empty. That night, Kayla couldn't shake the unease. Her curiosity got the better of her, so she searched the name Emily Hart online. The first hit chilled her to the bone. A news article from 5 years ago. Oakwood teacher arrested after student found dead in classroom. Emily Hart, 16, had been a junior at Oakwood. The article detailed how she had accused Mr. Donovan, a respected teacher, of inappropriate behavior. Days after filing the complaint, she was found dead in his classroom. The investigation ruled it a suicide, but rumors swirled about what really happened. The next day, Kayla couldn't focus. Emily's story gnawed at her, and she started noticing strange things. Books falling off shelves, lockers slamming shut on their own, whispers that seemed to follow her down the hall. Then came the lockdown. The announcement blared unexpectedly during Kayla's history class. "Attention! This is a lockdown. Secure all doors immediately." Mr. Donovan, Kayla's teacher, locked the door with shaky hands. His face was pale, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Is it another drill?" someone asked. I don't know," he muttered. The lights flickered, and then Kayla saw her again. Emily. She stood outside the door, her face pressed against the glass, her eyes dark voids. Her mouth didn't move, but Kayla heard her voice clearly. "He's lying. He did this to me." Kayla's blood ran cold. She turned to the class, but no one else seemed to see Emily. Mr. Donovan was pacing nervously, muttering to himself. The intercom buzzed, static filling the room before a chilling voice cut through. "You can't hide. Mr. Donovan." Mr. Donovan froze. The door handle rattled, then twisted violently, but it stayed locked. Kayla couldn't stay silent anymore. "It's her! Emily!" Everyone turned to look at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" Mia asked. Before Kayla could respond, the lights went out completely. In the pitch darkness, a loud bang echoed through the room, followed by a low, guttural whisper, "Justice." When the lights came back on, Mr. Donovan was gone. The door was wide open, and the desk at the back of the room, Emily's desk, was filled again. Her notebook sat on the desk, open to a single haunting sentence. "He paid for what he did, but I'm not finished." Kayla transferred out of Oakwood the next week. No one saw Mr. Donovan again, and no teacher would speak about Emily Hart, but every now and then students swear. They hear her name called during roll, long after her seat has gone empty.